No one in the hospital that day could have imagined that a seemingly normal afternoon would be the beginning of a story that would silence the whole of America. The sun had just set, a pale yellow light still clinging to the glass windows, and the nurses were preparing to change shifts. The hallway was quiet, except for the steady beeping of a heart monitor from somewhere. There was no sign that in a few minutes a dusty police dog would burst through the main door like a storm, carrying the despair of a child on the brink of death. Starting from outside the gate, the guards heard a loud scratching on the glass, then a frantic barking as if someone was trying to scream for help. But no one responded. The automatic door opened and a K-9 rushed in, its eyes glowing in the neon light. Its body was shaking with exhaustion, its fur was bloody, and in its mouth was a small bloody handkerchief that no one could guess who it belonged to. There was something in its eyes that stopped everyone. Not panic, but a desperate, pleading look. It wasn't barking to threaten. It was barking to warn. The doctor on duty initially thought it was a bad police prank, but as soon as Rex, a K-9 dog famous for its ability to track criminals, dropped the towel, everything changed. Amidst the blood-soaked fabric was a small strand of hair mixed with fresh mud. A little girl somewhere out there was seriously injured, and Rex was the only one who knew where she was. The dog couldn't speak, but his body was shaking, his eyes fixed on the door, as if he wanted the world to follow him. It approached each person, nudging their legs with its nose, as if urging them on, as if to make them understand that time was ticking away in precious seconds. And finally, when a nurse bent down to look closely at the handkerchief, she paled. She had seen similar injuries in kidnappings. This handkerchief wasn't just soaked in blood. It had been torn from some makeshift item, as if ripped off when the child struggled. Rex looked straight into her eyes, and in that moment, she knew someone needed them now. Rex turned back towards the door, barking repeatedly, taking a few steps forward and then looking back as if to say, "Follow me." The doctors and security looked at each other in confusion, but things quickly became clear when the police received an urgent call from the hospital. "We have a K-9 showing up alone with evidence of an injured child, and it is trying to lead us somewhere." An officer immediately ran in. Recognizing Rex from afar, he had worked with it before, and what gave him goosebumps was that Rex never left his post without orders or without being in an extremely serious situation. The fact that it ran straight into the hospital without a guide could only mean that someone's life was in its hands. Rex stepped closer, sniffed hard at the officer's clothes, and pulled gently, like a child holding an adult's hand for help. He didn't want to lose her another minute. The officer bent down to stroke Rex's head, but the dog jerked toward the door, his eyes full of urgency. There was no time to ask questions or doubt. The entire rapid response team was immediately mobilized. The hospital became the starting point of a race against death. As they follow Rex out, no one knows that this story began hours earlier. In a forest a few miles outside of town, the girl, an 8-year-old, went missing on her way home from a picnic. Her tiny screams were swallowed by the dense undergrowth, and the man who kidnapped her thought no one would find him. But there was one thing he didn't count on: Rex, a K-9 specially trained for missing person recovery missions. Rex found the scarf near a large tree where there were signs of a struggle. Instinctively, he rushed deeper into the forest, following the scent of blood and dirt. And when he discovered the little girl tied up, her face covered in injuries, her breathing so weak that it was almost gone, his heart felt like it was about to explode. K-9s were not trained to free hostages themselves, but that day, Rex did something no one had ever seen him do before. He used his teeth to bite through the ropes, pulled the little girl out of that dark place, then gently placed her on his back and ran, ignoring the gravel cutting into his legs. It ran through the woods, up hills, across roads. Every breath the little girl took was a silent plea, and Rex knew he had to take her to the only place that could save her, a hospital. But when it rushed to the hospital, placing her near the parking area, her breathing was too weak. It barked continuously for help, but no one heard. The man who had kidnapped it followed its trail, and in that moment, Rex understood that the danger was not over yet. It had to go back to protect the girl at all costs, and that's why it ran into the hospital, not only to raise the alarm, but also to call for someone to come with it to protect the baby from whoever was hunting. The real race has just begun. Outside the hospital, the sun had set, and the streetlights were beginning to cast a shadow over the cold ground. Rex didn't stop for a second, tugging at the officer as if to remind him that every moment could be the girl's last. The rapid response team got into the car as the siren wailed, shattering the silence of the evening. Rex jumped into the back seat of the first car, breathing heavily, eyes wide open, staring out the window, as if afraid that if he closed them even once, he would lose sight of the girl. The car sped off, following the direction Rex kept turning his head. The officer sitting next to the dog put his hand on its back, feeling every tremble. He had never seen Rex like this. It was not ordinary fear, but the desperation of a being that knew someone was relying on it to survive. An urgency that made even humans choke. When they reached the dirt road leading into the forest, Rex immediately jumped down, letting out a deep bark as if commanding. The rescue team turned on their flashlights and followed him into the darkness. The dense canopy of trees blocked the light, making the path ahead hazy like a nightmare. But Rex did not slow down. His legs, though bleeding, still ran as if he could no longer feel any pain. The smell of dirt, blood, and the mud from the towel reminded Rex of the moment he found her. The image kept replaying in his mind. The little girl curled up, her breathing thin as a thread, her eyes closed, her face purple with cold and fear. He hadn't had time to do what humans do. Reassure her, tell her everything would be okay. But he did the only thing he knew how. Use his body to shield her and lead her back to the light. The response team moved deeper into the woods, and then they saw something that gave everyone goosebumps. Strange tire tracks in the mud, large boot prints on broken branches, and small drag marks as if a child had been dragged. All of them led to a clearing a few hundred feet away. The lead officer raised his hand to signal a halt. Rex stood there, his feathers bristling, his body as stiff as a bowstring, his eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. In the middle of the silent forest, there were heavy footsteps. Someone was moving, not an animal, a person. Rex growled softly, a low, menacing sound that told the team they were about to face the kidnapper. No one knew if he was armed, but he was clearly searching for something, or rather, someone he had lost. The kidnapper didn't know the girl had been taken to the hospital. He thought Rex was still hiding somewhere with his trophy, and he wasn't going to give up. The flashlight panted, and a figure appeared. The man held a sharp object in his hand, panting, his clothes covered in mud. He turned around when he heard the police's footsteps. But when he saw Rex, his eyes widened with hatred. "You!" He gritted his teeth, his voice hoarse as if he had been screaming for a long time in the forest. Rex let out a deep roar, stepping forward, his front feet lightly touching the ground, but his body tensed, as if he was ready to charge into a duel. The officer shouted for him to drop his weapon, but he didn't listen. He took a few steps back, then suddenly turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. The chase order was immediately given. All flashlights were pointed forward, and his feet cracked on the branches. Rex shot forward like an arrow, his speed making it impossible for humans to keep up. He could smell him, the smell of fear, the smell of the one who hurt the girl. The chase took place in the pitch darkness. The man stumbled against a tree but still got up and ran, breathing heavily. He turned around in surprise when he saw Rex's bright eyes right behind him, and then he screamed, a desperate scream. But Rex didn't wait for the police. It lunged at him, grabbing his arm, causing the weapon to fall to the ground. The kidnapper tried to fight back, but Rex's strength was much greater. He was more than just a police dog. Today, he was the only shield between evil and the child hanging between life and death. The police rushed in, tackled him to the ground, and handcuffed him. The kidnapper screamed. But no one paid any attention to his words. Everyone looked at Rex, partly in surprise, partly in awe. Rex didn't stop to acknowledge the look, though. He turned sharply toward the hospital, as if to remind everyone that the job wasn't done. The bad guy was caught, but that little life still hung in the cold white light, waiting. The rescue team quickly left the forest. Rex jumped into the car as soon as the door opened, panting but his eyes never leaving the target. The drive back was long and silent. Only the sound of the car horn and Rex's heavy breathing echoed. When they returned to the hospital, the medical team was ready. They gave her the news. Weak heartbeat, cold body, many bruises. But she still had hope. The doctor said that getting her to the hospital in time was the only thing keeping her on this side of the border. Rex ran in, slipping on the floor, but still rushing towards the emergency room. He stopped in front of the door, scratching lightly on the wooden board as if he wanted to enter, but was held back. He sat down, head bowed, breathing heavily in trembling rhythms. But his eyes were still directed at the closed door. His gaze was like a silent plea. Save the girl. Don't let all his efforts be meaningless. The emergency room door closed, and the hallway fell into a tense silence. Rex lay flat on the floor, his eyes fixed on her. He had brought her to the only place that could save her. But now, everything was no longer in his grasp. The next battle will take place behind that door. The hospital hallway gradually fell silent as the emergency room door closed, leaving Rex lying outside, her body shaking not only from exhaustion, but also from a fear that she could not express in words. The nurses passing by all stopped to look. One gently placed a hand on her head, as if to reassure her. But Rex did not react. She just stared straight at the white door, where the little girl was struggling to hold her fragile breath. The officer sat down next to Rex, his hand on his back. He felt every strong breath, every small vibration under its dusty fur and dried blood. He understood that feeling, the helplessness of doing everything possible, but the result was beyond reach. He himself had witnessed moments when a human life was held by only a few fragile seconds. But looking at Rex now, he realized one thing. This dog had not just saved a child. It had fought as a father, a friend, a bodyguard, with everything it had. Time passes heavily. Each minute feels like hours. Doctors come in and out, speaking quickly, their faces full of concentration. Sometimes they run to get more equipment. Sometimes the nurse's voice rings out urgently, making Rex jump up. But then the door closes and he sits back down, trying to suppress a small groan in his throat. Then a long beep sounded from inside. The sound penetrated the crack of the door, making everyone in the hallway's hearts stop. Rex stood up, stepped back, and approached the door, his front paws lightly scratching the edge as if to break in. The officer held him back, gently but firmly. "Slow down, Rex. They're trying their best." But the dog didn't understand those words. He only understood that the sound was not normal. A doctor rushed out, asking for a defibrillator to be prepared. Rex let out a small scream, his chest heaving violently. The officer hugged her neck, holding her tightly, like a frightened child trying to rush into a fire to save a loved one. In that moment, he understood that Rex's feelings for the girl were not a duty. They were a bond that sometimes took a person a lifetime to achieve. The door slammed shut again, and the last Rex lay down in exhaustion. He rested his head on his paws, his eyes still open, still watching, still waiting for the miracle he couldn't create again. He had brought the girl here, defeated the kidnapper, and surpassed all his own limits. The rest was up to the people behind that door. The police team began taking statements, documenting the scene, and examining evidence from the woods. But every question led them back to one thing. If Rex hadn't discovered the child, if he hadn't freed her, if he hadn't carried her through the woods, if he hadn't rushed to the hospital immediately, then no one knew what would have happened. Or rather, everyone knew it would have ended so badly that no one wanted to talk about it. Meanwhile, the kidnapper was transferred to a detention room in the hospital for examination before being taken to the police station. His hands and feet were tied tightly, but his eyes were still filled with hatred. He refused to be silent, muttering that what should have belonged to him had been taken away. The nurses shuddered when they heard it, not daring to get close for long. No one understood why he targeted a child. He was not a human trafficker, not a psychopath on the run. He was just a lonely, dangerous man, haunted by his own hallucinations. And the most frightening thing was that he had chosen a child completely at random, making everyone shudder at the thought that the same thing could happen to anyone. When the police asked the officer why Rex left his post, he simply said, because it was the right thing to do, and because no one asked him to do it. He decided on his own. The people standing around were silent when they heard this. Everyone in the hospital saw Rex when he rushed in. No one could forget that image. A dog covered in blood, out of breath, but with eyes shining as if to say, "Help me, please help me." Time continued to pass slowly, and then after nearly an hour, the emergency room door opened again. A doctor walked out, his face tired but no longer as tense as when he entered. Everyone turned towards him in silence. Rex stood up, ears perked up, eyes fixed on the doctor as if waiting for an answer that the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for. "She's fine," the doctor said, his voice tired but noticeably lighter. "We've stabilized her heart rate. She'll need some monitoring, but she'll live." There were sighs of relief. Some of the nurses were crying from the tension. The officer gave Rex a gentle squeeze on the leash, but Rex didn't look at him. He just looked at the half-open door behind the doctor. He wanted to get in. He had to be sure. He had to see the girl alive. A nurse knelt down and stroked Rex's head, then whispered, "It's okay, boy. You deserve it." She opened the door wide, and Rex entered with slow, careful steps, as if afraid he might hurt the child again, even with just a breath. The small hospital room. The white light shining on the bed where the little girl lay, her face pale, but her breathing was more even. White bandages were wrapped around her arms, and her chest was covered with monitoring devices. But she looked much more peaceful than when Rex found her. He walked to the bed, tiptoed, his nose lightly touching the small hand lying next to it. A very small movement. Her fingers curled slightly, touching his nose as if recognizing the friend who saved her. Rex let out a small moan, a thin sound like a sigh of relief. He laid his head down on the edge of the bed, closing his eyes. He had fulfilled his promise, a promise no one had given him, but one greater than any mission he had ever taken on in his life. But the story isn't over yet, because as Rex lay down beside the little girl, no one knew that out there, in the hospital's holding area, the kidnapper was trying to escape. And when he began to plot his revenge, Rex, though exhausted, was the only being who felt it before anyone else. Rex lay by the girl's bed for a long time, his breathing gradually stabilizing, but his body clearly beyond its limits. The doctor wanted to take him for a checkup because of the bleeding wounds on his legs and stomach, but when they tried to touch him, Rex only raised his head, looked straight at them, then turned back to the girl as if to say that he wouldn't go anywhere. And finally, everyone understood. He would only leave when she was completely safe. The nurse placed a soft towel under Rex's head to ease his pain and left him lying still, like the world's most loyal bodyguard. Little did they know, in that quiet moment, another storm was brewing in a corner of the hospital that no one noticed, except Rex himself. In the holding area where the kidnapper was handcuffed to the hospital bed, he was biding his time. 2 officers stood guard outside, but the night had made the atmosphere quieter, and that made everyone complacent. The kidnapper lay still, eyes wide open in the darkness, watching their every move. He knew the girl was still alive. He heard the commotion when the doctor announced the good news, and the only thing he could think was no. For him, in his twisted mind, the baby was not allowed to live. He saw it as a strange completion that he had created for himself. When a nurse brought medicine to check, he lay motionless as if in a deep sleep. But as soon as she turned her back to change the IV bag, he jumped up, using his elbow to push her hard, causing her to fall. The ropes tightened around his hands, but he used the very metal bed that he had secretly loosened to chop down on the lock. The sound of metal cracking rang out softly, not enough to arouse the suspicion of the 2 officers outside. A few minutes later, he freed himself, quietly walking out the door after changing into a hospital gown to cover the stains. He looked around the dark hallway, taking slow but sure steps. He knew he didn't have much time. The police would be back to check at any moment. But the only thing he could think about was room 226, the girl's room. Meanwhile, Rex lay still at the edge of the bed. The soft white light shone down, making his eyes brighter than usual. The little girl was sleeping, her breathing steady but weak. Her small hands moved slightly, as if something in her dream was disturbing her. And it was then that Rex began to sense something that humans could not sense with their eyes or ears. A strange breath, a scent so light and so distant, yet so familiar that it made his whole body bristle. His scent, the scent of the one who hurt her. Rex opened his eyes, his ears perked up like antennas searching for a signal. He raised his head, turning slightly to listen closely. The hallway was still silent, the heart monitor beeping steadily. But as stable as it was, Rex still felt restless. His instincts were never wrong, and today, those instincts saved a life. It stood up, slowly, carefully, as if afraid to wake the little girl, stepping out from under the thin towel placed under its head. Its aching body made each step heavy as a stone, but Rex quietly walked towards the door, sniffing lightly at the crack. Still there. The smell was getting stronger and stronger, and then, at the end of the hallway, where the lights were flashing due to system maintenance, a figure appeared. Rex growled softly, the sound so low that only those closest to it could hear it. But the roar was haunting, like a warning from a guardian spirit. The figure stopped when he heard the roar. Then he took a step forward, enough for the light to shine on his face. A face distorted with hatred. He looked at the room number 214. His eyes flashed like a cornered animal. Rex didn't wait another second. He rushed out of the room, though his legs hurt so much that they nearly gave way. The sound of his claws hitting the tile floor was loud and alarming. He turned and ran, no longer as silent as before. He knew this encounter was inevitable. The nurses' screams rang out as they saw Rex chasing a man running down the hallway. But before they could understand what was happening, Rex had already shot past, his speed a complete contrast to the exhausted state they had seen earlier. The only thing keeping him steady was the fear of the little girl getting hurt again. He ran down the long hallway, rushing into the fire escape area. The door opened with a creak, but as soon as he pushed it shut, Rex lunged in, using all his strength to pin the door. The two struggled, the sound of metal vibrating, echoing in the air. He gasped, trying to push the door shut, but Rex used his whole body to hold it. His feet slid to the floor, but he wouldn't give way. Finally, the door swung open with a violent shove. He lost his balance and fell down the first step. Rex ran after him, barking like a bomb exploding. He scrambled to his feet and ran down the steep, twisting metal stairs. Rex followed close behind, his hot breath blowing in the cold air. Outside the fire escape, a nurse ran to the girl's room and saw the door wide open. She shouted an alarm. "Child, someone's hiding. Call the police." And within seconds, the entire floor was in a state of emergency. Downstairs, the kidnapper tried to spin and hit Rex with a metal bar he picked up from the floor. Rex dodged it, only to graze his back, making him groan in pain. But the pain didn't stop him. Rex jumped up, grabbing his wrist, causing the metal bar to fall and clang loudly against the steel floor. He screamed, rolling over the steps to escape the bite, then used his foot to kick Rex backward. Rex slid a few steps but quickly got up, roaring so deep that it stopped him for half a second. That half a second was enough for Rex to lunge again, like a shadow rushing from the subconscious. As the two sides were struggling, officers and guards rushed from both stairwells. A shout rang out, "Rex, get out of the way!" But Rex didn't listen. He was too close, too determined to back down. The kidnapper knew he had no way out. He turned, intending to jump over the railing and run downstairs. But Rex, with one last lunge, launched himself straight at his feet. He lost his momentum, and this time, the fall was more than just a few steps. He slid down, his body hitting the metal wall hard. Officers immediately rushed after him, restrained him, and handcuffed him. He screamed, cursing Rex, cursing the girl. But this time, no one would let him near the child. No one. Rex stood there, breathing heavily, his legs shaking. The officer ran over, knelt down, and hugged him. Good Rex. Good boy. Rex's eyes glanced towards the hospital room door upstairs. It had to be certain. She had to be safe. Only then did Rex allow himself to collapse. And as they take the kidnapper away, everyone knows that tonight, Rex saved the girl. For the second time. That night, the hospital gradually returned to the familiar atmosphere of a place always standing between life and death. But for those who witnessed what happened that day, everything was no longer normal. They saw a dog do what many humans could not do. They saw fear, despair, and then hope rekindled from those loyal eyes. Rex was still lying right next to the little girl's bed. Eyes half closed, but ears always moving at the slightest noise outside. Its strength was almost exhausted, but its protective instinct had not diminished. It was even stronger. The little girl slept deeply, her breathing steady like the sound of a gentle wind through the forest. Its small fingers occasionally twitched slightly, as if in her dream she could still feel the familiar warmth of her friend who risked his life to save her. The officer sat there, leaning against the wall, looking at Rex with an indescribable look in his eyes. He had witnessed many stories throughout his career, but he had never seen such a strong bond between a child and a dog that was not his family's. He thought to himself, perhaps fate had brought Rex to the right place, at the right time, and to the right person he needed to protect. Outside the hospital room, footsteps echoed softly. It wasn't the voice of a night nurse. It wasn't the voice of a doctor. It was cautious, heavy, deliberately slowing down, as if moving stealthily. Rex opened his eyes immediately. He didn't lift his head, but his eyes were fixed on the door, dark and alert. The officer noticed too. His instincts were still sharp despite his fatigue. He stood up slowly, his hand on the doorknob. The noise stopped. The hallway was so quiet that you could hear the steady beat of the girl's heart monitor. He opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty, but Rex's intuition was never wrong. He stepped outside, his eyes darting around, his heart starting to beat faster. He left the room for only a few seconds, but those few seconds were enough to send a feeling of unease down his spine. Just as he turned, Rex suddenly jumped up, growling low in his throat. He stared at the shadow outside the ward window, where the darkness partially obscured the small porch. The officer hurried to pull the curtain. As the curtain was lifted, a loud movement outside startled them both. Someone had jumped off the windowsill, running along the hospital fire escape. He didn't need to see clearly to know who it was. He escaped, then returned to finish what he thought was taken from him. He rushed out to call for help, and Rex didn't wait for anyone. As the door to the room flew open, Rex bolted out like a bolt of lightning, ignoring the bandages on his leg and the pain in his body. He ran as if someone's life depended on his every step. And it did. The girl was still in the room, and the person wasn't far away. In the long hospital hallway, chaotic sounds rang out. Heavy footsteps, metal falling, someone shouting for security. Rex brushed past everyone, eyes fixed on the front. There he was, running unsteadily, one hand clutching his stomach, a wound that was not yet bandaged properly. He was not as fast as before, but the obsession in his head kept him running, trying to find a way back to where the little girl was sleeping. Rex growled, the sound not like a normal dog's, but a warning cry of primal rage. He turned, saw Rex charging, and began to panic. He tried to open the fire escape, but his hands were shaking so much he couldn't turn it. The door swung open just as Rex jumped on him, sending them both tumbling down the first flight of stairs. The impact hurt Rex, but it didn't stop. It bit his arm, not to hurt him, but to hold him. Squeezing until the other officers arrived, he struggled wildly, screaming that the girl belonged to him, that he wouldn't let anyone take her from him. But all those words were cut off when the officer arrived and tackled him to the floor, handcuffing him tightly. Rex backed away, breathing heavily, his legs shaking with pain and exhaustion. The officer knelt down, wrapping his arms around her, his voice trembling slightly with too many emotions at once. "Good, Rex. It's done. You're safe now." Rex closed his eyes in the embrace, but his reassurance didn't come from words. He knew the girl was no longer in danger. He knew his mission was complete, truly complete this time. As they took him away, the nurses and patients standing along the hallway applauded, not because the police had caught the culprit, but because the dog had fought until the last second despite having no strength left. The officer picked up Rex and carried him back to the hospital room like a hero returning from his final battle. When Rex was placed down beside the bed, the little girl was still sleeping soundly, but her hand moved slightly, as if feeling something. He gently placed that small hand on Rex's head. A bit of warmth was transmitted, like a thank you from a young heart, without the need for words. Rex breathed heavily once, then relaxed completely. He wasn't asleep, just in a rare state of peace. Like for the first time in a while, he knew the world wasn't dangerous. At least, not to this girl. A few hours later, the doctor came in and smiled at the sight. He whispered to the officer that the girl would make a full recovery, and that she had unconsciously asked about her dog. He pointed to Rex lying beside the bed and said, "I don't think she'll ever forget her hero." Rex's story that day spread far beyond the hospital and into the city. Everyone wanted to know about the dog who had run through the woods, fought off a kidnapper, and delivered a child to the hospital on his own bleeding feet. But Rex didn't care. He didn't understand the meaning of media, fame, or accolades. He only knew one thing: the girl was safe, and with it, it was the greatest victory of my life. The story ends the next morning when the little girl opens her eyes for the first time, seeing Rex sleeping beside her bed like a solid rock, protecting her from the world. She reaches out a weak hand to touch its head, and when Rex opens his eyes, she gives him a small smile, as gentle as the first ray of sunlight through the window. "I miss you," she whispered, and in Rex's eyes was the answer without words. "I never left you."